Hi, it's Katrina. Today we are diving into some of the murkiest mysteries of the seas. We are going deep underwater where sunlight barely reaches and secrets linger for millennia. From curious secrets discovered off the coast of Greece to a caveman shipwreck, plus the most incredible lost Maya city that nobody knows about, be sure to subscribe and let's go! Sunken Secrets of Ancient Greece. 15 feet under the perfectly blue water of Greece's Zakynthos Island, divers were baffled by what looked like a sunken city. They came across pieces of debris scattered across the ocean floor. They found what looked like paved floors and colonnades. It seemed as if they had discovered the remains of a forgotten city from mythology. But was this truly a sunken Greek city or something else entirely? The divers were convinced they had stumbled upon a lost world. Archaeologists were not so sure. The divers thought they had uncovered the eroded remains of massive discs lying on the sea floor. Scientists suspected the discs might just be natural formations. The discovery was so bizarre that scientists had to get to the bottom of it. A team of researchers from the University of Athens dove down to the so-called ruins to look for proof of an ancient civilization. Sadly, they couldn't find any. There were some glaring problems right away. For example, archaeologists couldn't find any pieces of pottery. There were no coins or crumbling statues. Then they made some alarming revelations. It turns out the site predates all of human civilization. The ruins are 5 million years old. They weren't made by men, but by microbes. These students from Athens used a variety of techniques to study the mineral content of the formations. They weren't made using Roman concrete or some other artificial material. The curiously shaped formations were made from methane that had oozed out of the earth. Microbes and methane have a weird relationship. When methane is ejected from the Earth's crust, microbes will consume it as fuel. They leave behind a calcium byproduct. It's the same idea as an animal leaving waste after it digests its food. The calcium byproduct reacts with oxidizing methane to create natural cement. It's all just chemical reactions. That's what scientists say anyway. The naturally forming cement created what looked like massive discs, colonnades, and other structural ruins. It's all just a trick. Or is it? I want you to take a look at some of these photographs courtesy of the University of Athens and tell me what you think in the comments. Here's a picture of what the divers initially thought was a ruined pillar. Do you think it was made by humans or by natural processes? What about this photograph? It looks like a tilted floor on the bottom of the sea. Scientists say this too is the product of chemical reactions. Julian Andrews from the University of East Anglia said the tiled floor was made by a slower seepage of methane. The chemical reaction happened more gradually, creating what now looks like a paved texture on the seafloor. So, what do you think is submerged next to Zakynthos Island? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. A mind-blowing discovery under the waves. A collection of amazing artifacts made out of dragon glass have been found off the coast of Italy. Scientists think the artifacts came from a ruined ship steered by primitive cavemen. There is a lot going on here. Cavemen, dragon glass, a sunken ship, it's almost overwhelming. I'll start with the discovery itself, which was announced by the Nepalese cops. A group of police divers, that's a cool job, were the ones who found the submerged artifacts near Capri, a small island in the Bay of Naples. The artifacts were found strewn on the seabed around 100 feet below the surface. They appear to have been made from a material known as obsidian, which is volcanic glass. I don't know if you've seen Game of Thrones, but they had something similar in the show that they called dragon glass. If you're familiar with obsidian, you'll know it was one of the earliest materials used by Neolithic humans during the Stone Age. People made tools out of obsidian thousands of years before they figured out how to work with stronger materials, like copper, bronze, and steel. In Europe, Neolithic humans were using obsidian artifacts 9,000 years ago. They kept using them until roughly 2000 BC. Even as materials like copper were becoming more popular, obsidian was still widely available. It's not the artifacts that are mysterious in this case. Obsidian isn't rare by any means. The mystery is that the obsidian artifacts were found at the bottom of this sea at a potential shipwreck site. Neolithic humans aren't exactly known for their merchant fleets. They were capable of journeying out to sea, but typically they used small vessels like canoes. Discovering a Neolithic shipwreck would be one of the greatest underwater discoveries ever made. Scientists think that Neolithic boats were built using perishable materials such as grass and wood, which would have decayed centuries ago. As of right now, this discovery is in limbo. Archaeologists have not found physical evidence of a shipwreck. That said, the way the artifacts are grouped does make it seem like they were part of a ship's cargo. These volcanic glass tools may have been shipped by a Neolithic sea merchant. Scientists used to think that Neolithic people lived in caves and that's all they did. Now it's turning out they may have organized trading networks and sailed ships across the Mediterranean. And now for a quick break because it's shoutout time! I want to give a huge thank you to I Am Bush and Ashley W for supporting this channel. Thanks guys! Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already for more videos like this. The treasure of the flooded pyramid. Not all underwater discoveries are made in bodies of water. This discovery wasn't under the sea, but I still wanted to tell you about it. A team of archaeologists recently dove into a tomb because the whole thing was flooded. It's a sunken tomb that's technically on land, filled with water like a Mexican cenote. The flooded tomb was built for a pharaoh named Nestasin. He isn't exactly on the top 10 list of most famous pharaohs, partially because he didn't even rule Egypt. Nestasin was the pharaoh of the Kush kingdom between 335 and 315 BC. His domain was the land of Nubia, located in what are now the sweltering hot deserts of northern Sudan. How would you like to hear some other names that might sound sort of like gibberish? Nestasin was the son of Queen Pelka and King Harsiotef. His wife was Sekhmak, and his successor was King Aryamani. Nubian history is pretty awesome. They were just as interesting as their Egyptian neighbors in the north, making it a shame you don't hear as much about them. Nestasin even successfully defended Nubia from an Egyptian invasion, with the northern pharaohs trying to destroy the kingdom of Kush. The Kushites, as they're called, were a big enough threat that the Egyptians risked marching across the hellish desert to fight for power. Just like the Egyptian pharaohs, the rulers of Nubia had great funerary pyramids built as their tombs. But there was one major difference. Egyptian kings were buried inside their pyramids. Kushite kings were buried underneath them. In Nubia, pyramids were used a lot more like actual grave markers. The first of these pyramid tombs was discovered more than a century ago. Harvard Egyptologist George Reisner found a burial chamber deep underneath the Pyramid of Taharqa. Many more have been found since then, some dating back to the 8th century BC. That was when the Nubian pharaohs briefly conquered Egypt. I say briefly, but the Nubians ruled Egypt for a century. Sadly, many of the tombs are filled with water. In 2018, researchers uncovered the stairway down to Nestasin's final resting place, directly underneath his pyramid. They started excavating but hit the water table once they got 40 stairs down. From there, underwater archaeologist Piers Paul Kriesman took control of the operation. Kriesman is an associate professor at the University of Arizona. He led a team of subaquatic researchers to the bottom of the flooded ancient tomb. It was a brutal mission because, according to what Kriesman told National Geographic, normal scuba tanks wouldn't work. The tomb was too narrow, so the team had to rely on pump oxygen fed to them through giant hoses. Their only lifeline was an air hose. It was risky business, but the payoff was awesome. The team managed to collect a few small relics from the impossibly black depths of the tomb. They found small, glass-like statues covered in gold. Scientists suspect that because of the water, ancient looters were never able to breach the tomb and steal the treasure in the pharaoh's grave. It's kind of a double-edged sword. The looters couldn't steal anything, but the archaeologists are having a nightmare of a time collecting anything. They recovered a few artifacts, but think there are still far more relics submerged. What artifacts or treasures do you think they'll find? The unbelievable Soviet Atlantis. Oil Rocks is slowly but surely transitioning into a modern Atlantis. This Soviet city is the place where the first offshore oil well in the world was built. It is currently sinking into the sea, and soon it will be completely gone. In a couple hundred years, archaeologists will find this sunken city and people will make YouTube videos about it. Oil Rocks is located in the Caspian Sea just a few dozen miles off the coast of Azerbaijan, near the capital of Baku. It's huge, a floating mess of concrete and steel that looks like something from a dystopian fantasy. Take a look at the city as seen from the air, thanks to Google Earth. Does it even look real to you? The floating city was built by the Soviet Union in 1949. This was after Soviet engineers discovered black gold hidden thousands of feet underneath the seabed. By 1951, oil production was up and running. Can you guess which legendary dictator was at the head of the development process? That would be Joseph Stalin himself. It was the beginning of Russia's Siberian oil operations. And it's still going. Even though it is sinking, the city is still a functioning offshore oil platform. There are 2,000 workers, more than 100 miles of roads, and 256 oil wells. This is a man-made archipelago with 9-story apartment complexes. It has parks, hotels, a bakery, and its own museum. How have more people not heard about Oil Rocks? There's a power station, neighborhoods, and artificial islands. The islands are connected by bridges standing out of the water on metal stilts. Its rigs may be producing oil, but the city is rapidly collapsing. Scientists have said that by its 100th anniversary in 2051, it will be completely submerged. It's already nearly there. Out of the original road network of approximately 186 miles, only about 27 miles are still safe to use. The rest are breaking apart and sinking. Have you ever heard of this place before? Let me know in the comments. Another road at the bottom of the sea. Experts have discovered a stone road at the bottom of the sea like an old highway from the sunken kingdom of Atlantis. It's not clear if it's definitely from Atlantis, but it was a real sunken road and it dates back to 7,000 years ago. Divers couldn't believe what they were seeing when they spotted strange structures 16 feet deep off the coast of Croatia. One of the divers on the team was archaeologist Igor Borsic from the University of Zadar. He had not been expecting to find a piece of ancient history buried under several layers of sea mud. Although the road looks like something you would expect to find on the floor of Atlantis, it is not that. The submerged pathway was made by a mysterious maritime culture known only as the Havar. The road was actually an artificial bridge that stretched across the sea to a man-made island. The Havar was a Neolithic culture that lived along Europe's Adriatic coast during the Stone Age. Almost nothing is known about the Havar's origins, their beliefs, or why they built artificial islands. The newly found road is currently lying in pieces between Korčula Island and a destroyed sunken settlement. The Havar could have easily lived on dry land, but nope, dry land is for suckers. So they built artificial islands near the coast like little floating cities. Then they built long pathways made from wood and stacked stones to reach these artificial islands. This particular island settlement and its road were built around the year 4900 AD. Igor Borsic and his team also discovered another settlement on the opposite side of Korčula Island that is nearly identical to this one. The team found a treasure trove of Havar artifacts in its sunken ruins. These are artifacts you would expect from Stone Age people, but not really from people who were able to build artificial islands and long bridges. The artifacts were simple tools, like stone axes and fragmented blades. There is no indication of what happened to Havar in the end. They built their islands thousands of years before the supposed dawn of human civilization in Mesopotamia. Then they abandoned them, fading away into history. What I want to know, and I'm sure you're with me here, is why go through all of that trouble? They already lived on an island. Why did the Havar feel it necessary to build smaller islands? Could it have been for the kings of their ancient society? Or maybe the islands were built as temples to worship their sea god? A new species. A new species of creature has been found in the one lake you would never expect a new species of creature to be found. I'll give you a clue. The lake is great and full of salt. That's right, a new animal was found in Utah's Great Salt Lake. It's a discovery so big that scientists say it will change how they understand unique ecosystems. Scientists like to think they know stuff, then get surprised when they find out something new and intriguing like this. Scientists used to say only brine shrimp and flies could live in the Great Salt Lake due to its salt content, but now they have found worms living in the lake as well. The investigation began with one rebellious scientist from the University of Utah. His name is Michael Werner, and he's a professor of biology. When Michael visited the Great Salt Lake in 2020 for a hike, he saw a sign that he didn't quite trust. The sign explained how the salinity content of the lake prevented anything other than brine shrimp and flies from living in it, like I mentioned. Michael didn't believe in what the sign was saying. The worms Michael found are known as nematodes. They are tiny organisms that are found in nearly every single environment on the planet. Even if it's too inhospitable of a place for other creatures to live, you can find squirming nematodes. The same is true for the Great Salt Lake. Scientists knew they used to live in the lake before 1985 when the lake bed shrank, but it was believed they had gone extinct. You know, because of the lake being about 9 times saltier than the ocean. It's discoveries like this one that lead scientists and physicists to believe that there could be life on other planets. If worms can live in one of the saltiest lakes in the world, chances are other organisms can live on seemingly barren planets like Mars or even Jupiter. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. The second deepest blue hole found. Scientists recently discovered the second deepest blue hole in the world, and it is astonishing. But just what is a blue hole? A blue hole is a vertical cave in the ocean. It's kind of like a cenote or a sinkhole, only out at sea in a coastal region somewhere. Most blue holes only form where seawater comes into contact with limestone. Limestone is porous enough that water eats through the rock. The result is like one big hole in a block of cheese. It's also worth noting that most blue holes formed during an ancient ice age. 11,000 years ago, when the most recent ice age ended, global sea levels rose and coastal caverns around the world filled with water. It was enough that some of the caverns completely collapsed to make one big hole. Take a look at this image from Frontiers in Marine Science. This is what a blue hole looks like. And this is the one just found by scientists. It's a pit of darkness falling into the seabed. It almost looks like a portal to an alternate dimension. Scientists get excited about blue holes the same way they get excited about new caves, primarily because there is always a chance of finding new plants and marine life. Many blue holes are bursting with biodiversity. There are all kinds of animals like turtles, sharks, and weird species of corals. The problem with a blue hole is that it's hard to study. Christopher G. Smith from the U.S. Geological Survey is an expert in submarine sinkholes. Christopher said blue holes are poorly understood. They also contain almost no oxygen, with sunlight hardly penetrating below the surface. Blue holes are their own weird worlds, like voids in empty space teeming with zero-G creatures. Be warned, you don't want to dive into a blue hole because you might never find your way out. Little oxygen, no sunlight, and dizzying depths turn these things into death traps. In 2016, scientists discovered the deepest blue hole in the world. Its bottom so far down that it's like trying to swim to the bottom of the Mariana Trench. It's called the Dragon Hole in the South China Sea. It goes down more than 980 feet vertically. The newly discovered blue hole is off the coast of Mexico. It is a humongous underwater cavern in Chetumal Bay that goes at least 900 feet deep. That's around 80 feet less than China's Dragon Hole. Mexico's vertical pit of blue-black water isn't just deep though, it is gaping wide. The underwater cave of mystery spans an area of at least 147,000 square feet. Scientists have named the blue hole Tam Ja, which is Mayan for deep water. Relics of the Forge Master. Off the Baltic coast of Sweden, scientists discovered a very old wooden barrel. At first glance, it's not that interesting. I'll be honest, wooden barrels aren't show-stopping artifacts. But when underwater archaeologists looked inside the barrel, that's when things got interesting. The ancient barrel contained osmond iron from the 16th century. Okay, now you're wondering what osmond is. It's a type of iron that was made by melting pig iron in a hearth instead of a typical forge. Okay, now you're wondering about pig iron. As you may know already, not all irons are made equal. Pig iron is one of the most basic types of iron, also called crude iron. It's brittle but really easy to make and is one of the top products of the iron industry. Osmond iron is better. It was a type of wrought iron, which is strong and tough and durable. Because of its quality, Osmond iron became one of the most significant exports for Sweden during the Middle Ages. In 2017, scientists found a shipwreck in the Stockholm archipelago. It looked like a merchant vessel, a type of medieval construct called a clinker-built ship. When scientists analyzed the ship's timbers, they dated it to about 1553. It's unclear what happened, only that it sank and its cargo spilled out across the seafloor. This barrel was in its cargo. The iron had undoubtedly been on its way to somewhere else in Europe, perhaps to the forge of a master craftsman. I wonder how many swords and shields never got made as the forge master waited for his iron that was, unbeknownst to him, at the bottom of the sea. Holes on the ocean floor. Off the coast of Big Sur, California, there is a landscape unlike anything you have ever seen before. Unless you've dived Big Sur, at which case you've most likely seen it. This landscape is an underwater plain where the ground is dotted by massive holes in the sand and silt. It looks like somebody set off a series of bombs. Scientists discovered the bizarre pockmarks on the ocean floor decades ago, but they were never able to figure out what created them. They almost look like they were made by laser beams pounding the surface, or by ancient clam diggers. It's important to understand how many of these holes there are, about 5,200 in total, the average of which is almost 600 feet wide and 16 feet deep. It is such a crazy anomaly that scientists have given the region a name, the Sur Pockmark Field. It's about the size of Los Angeles. It's also on its way to being transformed into an offshore wind farm. The issue with turning the area into a wind farm is that scientists first need to understand what phenomenon created the holes. They can't have it happen again and destroy the wind machines. Luckily, scientists at the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute think they have the answers. On a recent expedition, scientists at the institute used an underwater robot to collect samples from the ocean holes. It turns out they may have been formed by our good friend, gravity. The sediment samples showed that a slope collapse or an earthquake likely caused sediment to flow through the region like an underwater landslide 14,000 years ago. It was a big enough disaster to leave pockmarks across the surface. It likely wasn't an alien bombardment like many people were thinking. Now the experts are left to decide whether they want to build a wind farm in a place where an underwater avalanche could go off at any second. The Empress of Ireland. On the muddy floor of the St. Lawrence River, divers came across evidence of one of the worst maritime disasters in history. It began with the sighting of something unusual. Divers found what looked kind of like an upside-down table, its legs sticking straight up in the murk. It was indeed a table, or more accurately, a compass platform. It had originally been on the deck of a ship called the Empress of Ireland. If you haven't heard the story of the Empress of Ireland, strap yourself in for a rough ride. This ship sank off the coast of Rimouski, Quebec in 1914. More than 1,000 people lost their lives as the ship gurgled and disappeared beneath the water. It was the worst maritime disaster to ever happen in Canada during peacetime. Over the last 110 years, historians have been trying to piece together what happened on that fateful day. Divers have been pulling bits and pieces of the ship out of the river for years. The compass platform is one of the newest artifacts. Here it is on the ship, the photo taken when it still floated. The image is from David St. Pierre, a maritime historian. The incident took place on May 9th in 1914. The fog was rolling in thick and dark. The Empress of Ireland ran into a Norwegian collier and foundered within only 14 minutes. Foundered means the ship filled with water. For a ship of its size, it sank way too quickly. This was a devastating tragedy, one made extra shocking because it happened only 2 years after the Titanic. In the aftermath of the Titanic's terrible sinking, ships were being equipped with enough lifeboats. The Empress of Ireland had more than enough escape boats for everybody on board, but it started sinking so fast that the people couldn't get to the lifeboats. Water gushed into the ship and drowned them before they could reach the deck. Out of the 1,477 people on board, approximately 1,012 died. It was horrible, a disaster for Canada and everyone who had family on the ship. Nowadays, the Government of Canada has the shipwreck designated as a protected site. There is a small historic pavilion in Rimouski with some of its artifacts on display. Other artifacts can be seen at a museum in Halifax. The Guatemalan Atlantis. There is one Maya city that is completely inaccessible to tourists. That is, unless you're a tourist who has the lung capacity to dive 50 feet deep into a Central American lake. The city I'm talking about is called Samabaj. It is the Guatemalan version of Atlantis. Lake Atitlan looks placid at its surface. The waters are calm and tranquil, with the wild mountains of Guatemala rising in the distance, so the lake looks as if it's sitting in a cradle. What you can't tell from just looking is that Lake Atitlan is the deepest lake in Central America, and there is an entire city at the bottom. Scientists from all over the world have been obsessed with studying Samabaj. The site is under the authority of Mexico's National Anthropology and History Museum. That hasn't stopped archaeologists from Belgium, Spain, Argentina, and France diving down to the sunken ruins. The current project has been ongoing since 2017. Researchers have been mapping the extensive ruins bit by bit, one dive at a time. It's a tough job because of the city's depth and the fact that so much of it is buried underneath thick lake mud. You most likely want an answer to the big question: how did the city of Samabaj end up at the bottom of the lake? It would make sense if the city was on the coast and it was gobbled up by rising sea levels or a tsunami, but it was in the middle of a lake. From what researchers have gathered so far, they know Samabaj was built around 400 BC. Up until disaster struck about 2,000 years ago, it was just like any other successful Maya city. Samabaj featured all the typical pieces of architecture you would expect. There were massive temples and square plazas for communal gatherings. The city boasted impressive monuments and large housing complexes. It was a fully developed city with dense urban infrastructure. Right, but the sinking? Do you have any guesses yet? I'll give you a hint. The Maya in this part of Guatemala appear to have taken a page out of the ancient Havar's playbook from prehistoric Croatia. Samabaj was built on an island, a real island that no longer exists. The little island was just big enough to build a Maya city on top. It originally stuck out of the center of the lake like a turtle shell breaching the surface, but then it sank. There's something you need to know about Lake Atitlan that will make all of this more clear. It's a volcanic crater. There never used to be a lake here. Then, 84,000 years ago, when a volcano erupted, it created a giant pit more than 50 square miles and over 1,100 feet deep. Everything was nice and chill until there was another volcanic event 2,000 years ago. This recent volcanic event was the apocalyptic disaster that destroyed Samabaj. Scientists don't know precisely what happened, only that the seismic disturbance caused a dramatic rise of water levels. The rising water swallowed Samabaj and the island. This would have been so terrifying for the people living in the city, I'm not even sure which other ancient disaster to compare it to. I would say Pompeii was about as abrupt and devastating as what happened here. Have you ever been in an earthquake? It just kind of happens, right? The ground shaking? It would have been something similar 2,000 years ago. The ground rumbled as the volcano awakened. Within minutes, everything and everyone was underwater. Prehistoric Ruins. Historians in Wisconsin recently announced a discovery of such magnitude it's hard to believe. 11 ancient canoes were found at the bottom of Lake Mendota near Madison. One of them dates back to 2,500 BC. That is old. This canoe was carved around the same time somebody had the brilliant idea of building Stonehenge. It was built before Rome was founded and before Jesus Christ. The youngest of the canoes is just shy of 800 years old, built in the Middle Ages around 1250. It's exciting to think that at the bottom of every lake there could be an ancient ruin. The Wisconsin Historical Society said they found one ancient canoe in 2021, then another in 2022, and now they are up to 11. The canoes were made by the indigenous people of Wisconsin as their primary means of transport and trade. Long before the American Midwest was home of the pickup truck, people used canoes to do everything. They fished in them, traveled in them, and used them for trade. There appears to be more at the bottom of Lake Mendota than just canoes. Divers also found stone tools and evidence suggesting an ancient village is buried beneath the sediment. It could have been that 4,500 years ago, Lake Mendota was dry, or at least drier than it is now. A group of Native Americans built a village and constructed a porch for their canoes. Then, at some point, water levels rose, and the whole place sank. What's your favorite sunken city that you can think of? Let me know in the comments below, and thanks so much for watching. Be sure to stick around for an older video you might have missed.
Granite head of Caesarion. Ptolemy XV Caesar, who went by the nickname Caesarion, was Egypt's last pharaoh and Cleopatra's illegitimate son with Julius Caesar. He reigned alongside his mother until she committed suicide in 30 BC, and continued ruling on his own until the Roman Emperor Octavian had him put to death, not very long after. He was quite the threat to his rule, and there was no way Octavian was going to let him live. There are very few surviving images of Caesarion since most of them were destroyed. One of these depictions came in the form of an enormous granite head that was pulled from the harbor of Alexandria in 1997. Dating back to the 1st century BC, it was found in a section of the ancient city that was submerged by earthquakes and tidal waves. The head was likely once part of a complete statue of the ruler. Alexandria's underwater ruins consist of numerous other fascinating artifacts, including a marble head of the Roman princess Antonia Minor, a sphinx, several shipwrecks, and much, much more. SS Thistlegorm vehicles. During World War II, German bombers struck a British merchant navy ship called the SS Thistlegorm, causing it to sink to the bottom of the Red Sea. The vessel had been built just a year earlier and had only completed 3 successful voyages. Thistlegorm carried steel rails, aircraft parts, grain, rum, and other cargo throughout her short-lived career. She traveled to the US, Argentina, and the West Indies. The vessel departed Glasgow, Scotland for Alexandria, Egypt in 1941, loaded with armored vehicles, motorcycles, trucks, ammo, guns, radio equipment, aircraft and railway parts, and 2 train locomotives. A crash in the Suez Canal stopped Thistlegorm from passing through, so the ship docked at a safe anchorage off the Egyptian coast. The Germans suspected that Allied troops were hiding on the vessel, so they dispatched 2 bombers to find and destroy it. 2 bombs struck the ship, causing some of its ammunition cargo to explode. 9 people died as Thistlegorm sank to her watery grave. French explorer Jacques Cousteau rediscovered the site during the 1950s. It was soon forgotten about until the early 1990s, when the coastal city of Sharm el-Sheikh opened it to divers. The section that was blown off the 420-foot-long ship during the attack created a convenient opening that visitors can use for easy access to the inside, which still contains most of the cargo, including the vehicles. The longest creature ever. Last year, a team of researchers encountered what they believe might be the longest creature ever discovered while surveying the seafloor off Western Australia. Known as a siphonophore, they described it as an enormous spiral floating in the water column. Scientists admitted that they didn't know exactly how long the otherworldly organism is. They estimated that its outer ring measured nearly 155 feet and said that they were in the process of determining its entire length. At the time, the team believed that the siphonophore was at least 390 feet long. They promised to update the world once they know for sure. If their estimate is correct, the creature would surpass the lion's mane jellyfish as the world's longest marine animal. The current record holder is 120 feet long. The siphonophore also stands to supersede the 180-foot-long ribbon worm, which is the world's longest land animal. Siphonophores are predatory deep-sea dwellers made up of small clones that work together as one organism. They take on a rope-like appearance and resemble jellyfish, but are more closely related to corals and anemones. Lead researcher Nerida Wilson told CBC that the clones somehow communicate with one another to harmoniously take on different roles, like feeding and reproduction. Scientists admittedly know very little about siphonophores and don't even know how they reach such enormous lengths. Severed hands. While working in Russia's Far East near the Chinese border in October 2018, some fishermen found a sack containing 54 severed human hands, along with medical bandages and surgical shoe covers. The alarmed gentleman called the local police, who determined through fingerprints that the hands belonged to at least 27 different people. In the meantime, rumors flew like wildfire, with some speculating that the hands were cut off as a punishment for theft. Police theorized that the severed appendages were amputated limbs from a medical facility that had been disposed of improperly, but they were left scratching their heads when they realized that many of the people the hands belonged to had had both hands cut off. Usually a person only needs one hand amputated. It's possible that the hands were cut off of corpses to retain fingerprint information after burial, a practice that is reportedly somewhat common in Russia, but the story remains unclear. The hands were not connected to any suspected criminal activity, and the Russian government offered little explanation beyond stating that the limbs came from a forensic lab and not to worry about it. They always say that. Underwater Jesus. You may be surprised to learn that there are numerous submerged statues of Jesus Christ throughout the world. One, known as the Christ of the Abyss, sits in the waters off San Frutuoso, Italy. Made by sculptor Guido Galletti, it was placed in the Mediterranean Sea in 1954 as a tribute to Dario Gonzat, the first Italian to use scuba gear. The bronze likeness sits 56 feet below the water's surface. Another famous underwater Jesus sculpture can be found off the Florida Keys in John Pennekamp Coral Reef State Park. Dubbed the Christ of the Deep, the 4,000-pound barnacle-covered statue was created by Guido Galletti, the same sculptor who made the Christ of the Abyss in Italy. It was installed in the waters off Key Largo in 1965. It's the third of a series of Jesus statues that Galletti has placed underwater. The second sculpture was placed along the coastline of St. George's, Granada in 1961. It was a gift to the Navy of Genoa for their diligent efforts to rescue the crew of the MV Bianca C, an Italian vessel that was destroyed in a fire. Lake Michigan is home to the only underwater crucifix in the world. Measuring 11 feet tall, it features a nearly life-sized figure of Jesus. But it wasn't created by Galletti, unlike the other Jesus statues. In 1955, a teenage boy died in a car accident in the town of Bad Axe, Michigan. His grief-stricken family bought the crucifix as a memorial to the teen, but it broke during shipping, so they refused to take it. In 1962, a local diving club in the Little Traverse Bay gave the statue a home at the bottom of the lake in memory of a diver who died nearby. Ancient chicken egg. While excavating a watery pit in Buckinghamshire, England in 2016, scientists discovered 4 ancient chicken eggs. They only managed to retrieve one without breaking it. It was estimated to be around 1,700 years old, making it the only complete egg dating back to Roman-era Britain. The 3 eggs that broke released what the team later described as a putrid stench. After sitting around for over a millennium, I can imagine. Archaeologists uncovered other rare artifacts, including leather shoes, wooden tools, and a basket made from oak and willow. People threw items into the pit for good luck from the 3rd century onward. It functioned as an ancient wishing well of sorts, according to senior project manager Edward Biddulph, who spoke with the BBC. He speculated that the eggs may have been a food offering that was thrown into the pit during a funeral. Apollo 11 rocket engines. The 1969 Apollo 11 mission is famous for putting a man on the moon for the first time. After launching on July 16th of that year, it deposited its Saturn V F1 rocket engines into the Atlantic Ocean. 2 of them were found in 2012, courtesy of a team from Bezos Expeditions, an exploration company owned by Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos. They found the rocket engines using deep-sea sonar, then used remotely operated vehicles to gain a closer look. The crew found a tangled and time-worn mess of parts on the sea floor, 14,000 feet below the water's surface. There was only one way to tell how intact the parts were: by removing them from the water. In a statement, Bezos explained that the rocket engines had hit the surface at high velocity before spending over 40 years in highly corrosive salt water. At the same time, he said they are made of tough stuff, so we'll see. Because 67 Saturn V F1 engines were launched between 1967 and 1973, the team had to verify that the pair were actually from Apollo 11. They confirmed this several months later by examining the part's extremely worn and barely detectable serial number. Mystifying blob. Several years ago, divers encountered a huge, unexplainable jelly-like orb off the western coast of Norway. It measured over 3 feet wide and had a dark streak through the center. Nearly 100 similar sightings have been reported near Norway and in the Mediterranean Sea since 1985. Until recently, scientists were just as perplexed as anyone else when it came to identifying the bizarre, translucent blobs. A DNA analysis finally put the mystery to rest last year, when researchers identified the orbs as rarely seen egg sacs belonging to the short-fin squid. The species is common throughout the Mediterranean and the North Atlantic. Each orb can hold hundreds or even thousands of eggs, which sit suspended in a slowly dissolving mucus. Scientists have known about the short-fin squid for over 180 years, but this was the first time that they identified the species' eggs in the wild. They also observed squid embryos throughout 4 different stages of development and watched the changes in the sac as the eggs matured. The large orbs keep the creature's eggs buoyant, protecting the unborn young from predators along the sea floor. Mystery solved. A forest. Off the Alabama coast in the Gulf of Mexico, there is a 60,000-year-old cypress forest that once stood on dry land. The trees sprouted along the banks of a river at around the same time ancient humans are believed to have started migrating out of Africa. Sea levels rose, eventually engulfing the entire forest. It sat undisturbed until 2004, when Hurricane Ivan disturbed the seabed, revealing its presence in modern-day Mobile Bay. Last year, scientists announced that the trees contain materials that might be useful in the development of certain life-saving medicines. This realization came after divers retrieved samples of the wood as part of a NOAA-funded expedition. Divers found that the trees were remarkably well preserved after spending years buried in sediment that prevented oxygen from reaching them and causing them to decay. Experts removed over 300 organisms from the wood, including a previously unknown species of shipworm that produces over 100 types of bacteria. Many of the bacteria are new to science and are undergoing DNA analysis to determine their potential medical uses in cancer-fighting and pain medications. According to a NOAA statement, in the past, at least one shipworm species has shown promise as a possible antibiotic against parasitic worm infections. The wood may also prove to be useful in paper products, renewable fuel, chemicals, animal feed, and more. Vintage Bugatti. In 2009, a 1925 Bugatti Type 22 Brescia Roadster was found at the bottom of Lake Maggiore along the border of Italy and Switzerland. After sitting underwater for 73 years, it was damaged and heavily rusted. Despite this, the car sold at auction for around $400,000. But how did it get to the bottom of the lake in the first place? According to records, the car was registered to a French address when it ended up in Lake Maggiore in 1935. Grand Prix driver René Dreyfus had reportedly lost it to Swiss playboy Adalbert Baudet during a drunken poker game the previous year. Adalbert allegedly tried to bring the car into Switzerland, but didn't want to pay the hefty import taxes that came with it. So he told the authorities to do whatever they wanted with it, and they supposedly handled the matter by rolling the car into the lake. This might sound crazy, but at the time, the vehicle wasn't worth much. It was rediscovered in 1967 by a diver named Hugo Pillon. Over 40 years later, a local dive club finally rescued it with plans to sell it and put the proceeds towards a charity that combats youth violence. Peter Mullen, who owns the Mullen Automotive Museum in California, bought the Bugatti and put it on display there. He did not restore it, but instead left it as is, placing it in an exhibit that recreates the feel of being at the bottom of a lake. A strip club. While researching off the Israeli coast several years ago, marine biologist Gil Koplovitz came across a submerged nightlife venue that was no longer in business. He released perplexing images of the abandoned establishment in 2013. Located in Eilat, the business originally opened as a restaurant called the Red Sea Star. It was reportedly later repurposed as an erotic dancing venue, aka a strip club, called Nymphis Show Bar. The building's entrance is above water. Speaking with the Huffington Post, Koplovitz explained that visitors crossed a 230-foot bridge and then descended a flight of stairs to get inside. He said he was unsure when the strip joint closed its doors. Koplovitz snapped photos of the former club's interior through the resting venue's glass windows. The images show a stripper pole that functioned as a centerpiece. It was once surrounded by tables and chairs that have since been removed. Curiously, very little information is available online about the Nymphis Show Bar, other than the details Koplovitz offered after conducting his own investigation. It may have been the only underwater strip club that ever existed. Thanks for watching! What's the craziest thing that you've seen underwater? Let me know in the comments below, and remember to subscribe if you haven't already. See you later! Bye!